Yeah, as I said, it is sort of design day on the show. So right now we're going to talk revenue design, which was a new concept for me. And then later in the show, we're going to talk life design. So it's a whole design day here. Pam, before we get specifically into revenue design, give me a little of your background and tell me a little bit about revenue influencers.
Sure. So, I'm one of those traditional marketers. I actually did radio and broadcast.
All that
print.
Traditional. Print. What's that?
Newspaper, yes. Magazine. And cross that great divide into the technology
into the world of digital. Yeah.
That's right. Where we don't have to think so much. We can just throw stuff out there and see if it fits.
That's right.
So I've
thinking's
done that.
Overrated.
It is. And, we can take it right down. So I made that shift. I've worked for corporations, owned my own agency a couple of times now, and also done the sales thing. And about 6 years ago, had a client that said, look, you're awesome. We are driving leads, but our sales guys are yelling. They're just not making money. And so went in and I did an assessment, and I realized that the challenge wasn't that the marketing team wasn't good or the sales team wasn't good. They just didn't have a process. They didn't have a design of how this has to get done. It became my passion.
I think there's I think that's a really interesting niche, because I have heard that I know people who work on both sides in a variety of different companies, on the lead generation side and on the sales side.
Right.
And you're right. I think a lot of times there's a disconnect. And I also think, and I could be wrong, you'll tell me, but I almost feel like the bigger the company, the bigger the disconnect.
I think it's true. And I also think that, right now there's this whole sales and marketing alignment and let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And I don't think that these folks, it's not that they don't want to work together. They just don't know how to work together because the company hasn't defined that.
Right.
So when it's not defined, you're automatically at odds, right? And you're measured on different things.
Right. And I also think, and you're the expert here, but I also think that there is a lot of software right now being thrown at these companies. Look, we just had Terminus getting a huge investment, right?
Yep.
And that's exactly what they do.
That's right.
And so there's a lot of this marketing lead gen kind of software that I think a lot of companies, instead of, again, necessarily thinking through the process, are just, attaching themselves to a product.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I call it treating the symptoms, right? So they launch a new website, they spend more money on lead gen, they invest in technology,
right? And
report after report after report, year after year after year, comes back and says, look, only 27% of the leads are actually qualified.
Right.
Sales is kicking 80 of them to the curb. You've invested in technology, but the reality, at least on the last report, is less than a third of those folks say they're getting what they expected out of the technology.
Right.
And it really does come down to, it's just like all these fragmented pieces. So how do you put all those pieces together?
Right. Or you can look at it from the lead gen side, and they're going, look, we gave you great leads. Right. You're not following up on them.
Right.
That happens too.
Well, and even worse is we gave you great leads and we don't know what happened on the other side. I had a client that they had over 4,000 leads in 1 year, had an increased lead gen, and their sales were flat on the other side. So when we went through and we did the assessment and I was helping them with their design, 2,700 leads never touched.
Wow.
Marketing didn't know that. Sales had looked at them but never touched them, and there was no reporting, again, because there was no process to know that those were sitting there, never anything done with them.
I love it. Pam, well, I don't love it. I love it for you because there's a problem to be solved. Pam Hege hanging out with us this morning, managing partner for Revenue Influencers. We're talking all things revenue design. So let's get into this. What does it really mean to design your process for revenue?
Best way to put it is revenue design is really about creating this kind of continuous flow, right? That from the moment that you would engage with a buyer all the way through to when it's close won or close lost.
Okay.
Or maybe stalled.
Yeah.
Which seems to happen a lot of times.
Yeah.
And it's not just about thinking, okay, because I've had marketing and sales leaderships that'll say, hey, I can tell you the steps, and they can, but they don't put the detail behind it. They can't tell you how the technology supports it. And so the design part is really to get down and detail that and document it, right?
Right.
So that you know every step. And I call those points being really the transition points or the engagement points. So it's from the moment they engage with you, when they're making decisions, meaning the buyer's deciding, am I going to go forward, am I going to stay back? And then when you're transitioning them between what I'd like to call revenue influencers, which is marketing, sales, ops, and who's handling those things.
Yeah, and I think, too, it sounds to me like there are, and this is why you need a design process, there are probably a lot of holes where people don't realize that's where things are falling through.
That's exactly right. So I speak a lot. I do a lot of presentations on behalf of marketing automation companies specifically, and I tell them, you want to have some fun, go into a room, bring in some marketing and sales folks, maybe your ops folks, IT if they own technology. If not, it's okay, leave them out. And get a whiteboard, and then have each group say, here's what happens, right? And what you're going to see as you start to put that together, you're going to see these huge gaps where you don't have that information.
Yeah.
And so it allows you, at least at that point, to go back in and say, oh, now I see where leads are disengaging, kind of disappearing.
Yeah.
Oh, now I see why the sales guy has, 40 open leads and hasn't done anything with them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and now correct me if I'm wrong too, but if each group did their own whiteboarding of the process, they would be completely different, right?
Right, and it would still be fragmented, right? And that's what ends up happening. That's really where we got the name Revenue Influencers for the company.
Yeah.
Because the concept here is that everyone has a role and responsibility. People like to say sales owns revenue. No, the CEO or the owner of the company owns revenue, because no group controls that, has all the control of it. So if you think about it as revenue influencers, everybody has a role. Everybody's participating in some way.
Yeah.
The revenue design allows everybody to know, when do I touch them? When do I push them back to somebody else? How does the technology automate or make it a manual process? Just defines it for them so that it kind of fits together.
Yeah. Now I know this is not exactly what you do, but it just made me think too that not only in this day and age, not only do all those folks who I think we could kind of figure out influence revenue. Although, to your point, I think for a long time, marketing was sort of just like, oh, it's a cost center.
Yeah, right.
But I feel like now everybody really can impact revenue. Everybody from, a customer service call, person to anybody who touches a client in any way, and even back office people, because they represent the company when they're out in the world, technologists, if they're not understanding what the client's needs are.
That's exactly right. And that brings up a good point. So we think of lead to revenue as when that deal's closed, right? Yep. Sales guy gets his commission, everybody's happy. But then there's the piece about the onboarding, especially if you have clients that are going to buy other services for you. So who reaches out? Is that the client services people? Is that do they push back to the salesperson? And a lot of times not any of that has been documented either.
Right. And then you take it you can continue to take it further, right? Because let's say you get the onboarding right because you've hired Pam Hege and she figures it out for you. Right. So let's say you get that right, but then the person's on board and you just leave them alone for a year. Well, then they don't continue to buy from you. They don't recommend you to their peers. They don't buy another
That's exactly right. And so you end up leaving money on the table.
Right. And we all know it's way cheaper to keep an existing client happy than to find a new one.
Right. Right.
And yet.
And that technology that you were using at, the top, middle, bottom of the funnel to get that client, that's still applicable to the folks that are actually your customers now, too.
Yeah. This all fascinates me. Don't you wish sometimes, well, you are shaking people, but sometimes I just wish I could shake people and be like, listen, you got to do it this way.
What always makes me laugh is when we do, to kick this off, we really go in and we do an on-site and we get marketing and sales and ops and sometimes IT in the room. And when they first start, they've got their arms crossed,
Right, they're like,
they don't want to sit together. They want to talk together.
Right.
By the end of this, they're like, oh, this is great, and it really will cut down on the finger pointing. But more importantly, it actually impacts their revenue.
Yeah.
And the sales guys start having some success, so they're like, great, we're into it. It's muscle memory. I'm going to keep following this process.
Yeah, yeah. Before we, kind of go away from this, are there verticals or sizes of business that sort of lend themselves best to doing this kind of process?
So it's been interesting. I find that really the mid-sized companies who are getting ready to take that next step and don't really know how to get to that revenue piece, this is a good for them because they're starting to scale. So it's a good thing for them to go through. And then the enterprise companies who just, quite frankly, have stalled on the revenue, right?
Yeah.
They just... They try to treat some of these symptoms with the website or with the leads, and they get that little spike, but they can't sustain it.
Yeah, and Pam, there are so many. Well, there's a lot of companies in that middle.
Oh, they need the help to get over that hump.
Yeah, are the newer companies more open to this versus sort of the companies that have been around forever?
No, the scary part is they're not even thinking about it. They're just starting the engine and going.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a lot of companies that have really done amazingly well and done like fast growth to sort of get to middle market.
Right.
But they did it so fast.
For it.
Yeah, because they had some amazing product or whatever it was that sort of catapulted them.
Probably it's very true here in Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
With
all
my
goodness.
Technology and all the stuff that's happening.
Yeah, yeah. And I know we're about to, I think, have the ACG Fast Forward and, all those middle market companies crushing it. They all need Pam Hege. I'm just saying. Pam,
Thank you.
So great to have you here.
I appreciate it.
I really appreciate the insight on revenue design. We'll post a link to all things Pam on our show notes at biz1190.com/Dana Barrett. Don't go away. We'll be back.
Thanks.